The United States has a homeless problem. Over the past decade, homelessness has become much more visible in some key states. But is homelessness actually worse than in other parts of the country? Let's find out. Hello and welcome back to Atlas Explains the World, the YouTube channel where we try and explain the world through maps and data. I am your host, Jeff Gibson, and today we are going to talk about homelessness. More specifically, we are going to talk about why homelessness appears to be worse in some areas than others. After all, if we look at this map of total homeless, we're going to see quite a few states light up. The West Coast shows up here, but then so do a few states in the Northeast, Washington, D.C., and actually a few states around the country. Even Florida has a sizable homeless population, but many of these states aren't actually associated with homeless in the same way that others are, such as California. And that's what we're going to explore today. But first, before we dig into homelessness any more than we already have, we're going to first talk about the current cost of housing. Now, many of our current problems around the cost of housing can unfortunately still be traced back to the Great Recession about a decade ago. If you were alive and of adult age during this time, you'll probably remember vividly all of the financial systems across the US and much of the world were rocked by their own risky behaviors with respects to giving out loans to people who couldn't afford those loans. But it was a major catalyst towards the impending doom of many of the large banks across the country. And as banks closed and more people lost their jobs due to the economy taking a huge hit, more and more homes went into foreclosure and people lost their homes. This had a nasty side effect where the price of housing took a hit as well. Of course, as people lost their homes to foreclosure, their credit was shot too. And to rub salt in the wound, a lot of these same people also lost their jobs due to the economy flagging. And all of this contributed to what we now see is the biggest impact on homelessness today. That is the complete lack of building an adequate amount of housing for about 7 years. And truth be told, we're still not building enough housing even today. So just to track back a bit, the Great Recession caused 1, people to lose their jobs en masse, 2, a huge amount of foreclosures across every major city in the country, 3, the credit scores of those previous homeowners to take a real big hit, and 4, a complete collapse in the amount of housing built over a 7-year period. That last point is very important because it's probably the one aspect of the Great Recession that's still wreaking havoc today. Basically, it boils down to this. Without many people buying homes, construction companies stopped building homes. And without construction companies building homes, many of those construction companies went out of business themselves. Unfortunately, the dip in the cost of housing during the Great Recession did not stick around for too long. Fueled by an economy that was getting back on its feet and increasingly lower interest rates, former houses that were foreclosed on were starting to sell again. And the market for those houses rebounded. But unlike the rebound in the housing market, there wasn't an equivalent rebound in the construction housing building market. And even if there was a rebound to pre-recession home building, it wouldn't have been enough. New housing starts would have had to increase well above pre-recession levels to account for the amount of housing lost that would have been built had the Great Recession not happened. Which leads us to why housing is so expensive today, especially in areas that have had other market forces pushed on them, like the San Francisco tech boom. But make no mistake, almost every major city in the US has seen a drastic increase in the cost of housing. And with an increase in home prices comes an increase in rental prices. And with an increase in home and rental prices naturally comes an increase in homelessness. And with that, let's get to homelessness itself. So since about 2012, there's been a very visible increase in the amount of homeless that we see every day, particularly if you live on the West Coast. But is it true that the West Coast actually has more homeless? Well, it kind of depends on how you look at the data. You see, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development parses out their data in a couple different ways. And specific to this episode is whether or not a homeless person is sheltered or unsheltered. A person who is homeless but sheltered is just that. They sleep inside someplace. This could be a homeless shelter. It could be a tiny house village like we're starting to see pop up in cities like Portland, Oregon. Or it could be at a friend or family member's house. These people are homeless in that they don't have a permanent place for their stuff, but otherwise have their basic shelter needs accommodated for in some way. Contrast this with an unsheltered homeless person who, while also homeless, is living directly on the streets. While at one point this was mostly thought of as a lonely person sleeping on a park bench, it's increasingly becoming something more akin to tent villages, with shabbily built faux structures that honestly wouldn't be uncommon in a country with a fraction of the United States' wealth. And so if we look at our homelessness map again, you'll recall that while the West Coast definitely had a lot of homeless, there was a number of other states that lit up as well. But what if we look at the total amount of unsheltered homeless? Well, now our map looks like this. As we can see, the West Coast now really lights up. And this kind of explains why when we think of homelessness at large, we're generally speaking about the West Coast. and more specifically, California. Skid Row in Los Angeles and the Tenderloin in San Francisco are two of the most infamous neighborhoods for people who are homeless. And this is because most of the homeless people who live there are unsheltered. To drive the point home even further, if we compare New York, California, and Texas, three of the more populated states in the country, we see three very different stories unfold on how each has handled homelessness in the past and present. New York has quite a lot of homeless people, but they actually managed to shelter most of them. Texas has a relatively lower amount of homelessness overall, and they managed to shelter about half of them. And then there's California, which has the most amount of homelessness overall, and they only managed to shelter about 21% of them. California is home to so much wealth, and yet they struggle to find any meaningful shelters for their most vulnerable populations. And so you end up with a homeless population that is just flat out more visible than basically anywhere else in the country. Of course, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii all have very visible homeless populations as well. And they suffer from the same issue as California. There are simply not enough shelters or programs who shelter homeless people. And now you might be thinking, well, California has far and away more homeless people in total, more than Texas and New York combined. That's probably why they're more visible. And while that is true, if we actually look at the data on a per capita level, the differences between these three states are far less pronounced. On a per capita basis, New York has more homeless people than California. Texas, for its part, does legitimately have fewer homeless people overall than its peer states. However, Texas is also considerably less expensive than either California or New York, which plays a considerable role in how they're able to manage this. And of course, Texas is actually starting to creep up in housing costs. So we could see some changes to their fortunes if we don't address the root causes of homelessness. Unfortunately, there's no one solution to fix homelessness. Everyone finds their path into homelessness in a different way. That said, one of the most effective methods to end homelessness is to, quite simply, give people a home. That might sound like a very expensive proposition, but there's actually some real-world examples of this working. Finland, in 2007, started a program called Housing First. This was a program wherein they started giving homeless people a house, regardless of their other issues. The logic here being that if you could get homeless people into a single place for an extended period of time, you could then start to work on their other issues. After all, the primary societal problem around homeless people is their lack of a home. If you fix that, their other problems become much more manageable. The state of Utah adopted a very similar program and saw very similar results until the state stopped funding the program. Since then, they've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of homeless people they have. The reality here is that the US needs a national, federal mobilization against homelessness. Since the early 2000s, the United States government has spent untold trillions of dollars on wars overseas, none of which has provided any tangible benefit to American citizens. In fact, maybe quite the opposite. Were the federal government to direct the same level of money and effort to our homegrown homelessness problem, well, there certainly wouldn't be any tent villages popping up all around the country. This was a very high-level look at the homelessness issue, but there's so much more to it than anything you watched in this episode. If you're interested in learning more about homelessness, I urge you to check out the people at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can find them. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did like this episode, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really helps keep me going. Hey, I've got some other videos you can watch right now. Check them out.